Marcus Carter dropped to the polished hardwood floor with a sickening thud.
Get open
The
now!
basketball rolled harmlessly across the court as players from both teams froze. Marcus, his best friend, sprinted toward him. "Coach, somebody call an ambulance." Marcus clutched his chest, struggling to breathe. His vision blurred as the gym ceiling spun above him. Every breath felt heavier than the last. I can't breathe," he whispered. The crowd erupted into panic. His mother, Sarah Carter, had arrived just in time to watch the final minutes of the game. The smile on her face disappeared the instant she saw her 16-year-old son collapse. "Marcus," she shoved through the terrified students, dropping to her knees beside him. "Baby, look at me. Stay with me." Marcus reached for her trembling hand. "It hurts." "I know, sweetheart. Help is coming." David Carter rushed into the gym less than 3 minutes later after receiving Sarah's frantic phone call. "What happened?" "He just collapsed," Sarah cried. "He was fine this morning." The distant sound of sirens grew louder until paramedics burst through the doors. Everyone stepped back. Within moments, Marcus was surrounded. Blood pressure, heart monitor, oxygen mask. One paramedic looked up at his partner. "We need to move. Now." Sarah climbed into the ambulance without hesitation. David followed close behind. As the ambulance sped through traffic with its sirens screaming, Sarah held Marcus's hand. "You promised we'd go fishing this weekend," she whispered through tears. Marcus forced the faintest smile. "I still want to." "You will. You hear me? You will." David sat silently beside them. He had spent 16 years solving every problem that came his family's way. Broken bones, school bullies, financial setbacks. Nothing had ever made him feel helpless. Until now. This time, he couldn't fix it. The emergency room exploded into organized chaos. Doctors and nurses surrounded Marcus the second the stretcher rolled through the doors. Sarah tried following. A nurse stopped her.
"I'm sorry, Mom."
"You have to wait here."
"No."
Sarah cried. "That's my son. We're doing everything we can." David gently wrapped his arms around her. "They're helping him. We have to let them." Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. Finally, cardiologist approached. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter?" They stood instantly. "Your son is stable." Sarah burst into tears of relief. "Oh, thank God." "But..." That single word stole the relief from their faces. "We found something unexpected." David frowned. "What is it?" The doctor folded his hands. "Marcus has an extremely rare genetic blood disorder." Sarah blinked. "Genetic?" "Yes. It doesn't usually become obvious until adolescence." David looked confused. "What does that mean?" "It means we need to determine whether another family member is a compatible donor." Sarah immediately nodded. "Take whatever you need. My blood. My bone marrow. Anything." David stepped forward. "Test me first." The doctor gave a sympathetic smile. "We'll test both parents and any biological siblings. Time matters. We'll begin immediately." Within the hour, blood samples had been collected from David, Sarah, Marcus, and 12-year-old Lily. No one thought much about it. Why would they? They were a family. Families matched. Families helped each other. Families survived together. Or so they believed. Outside the hospital room, Marcus finally opened his eyes. His throat was dry. His body felt weak. Sarah rushed beside him. "Oh, sweetheart. You scared us." Marcus managed a tired smile. "Did we win?" David laughed despite himself. "You're worried about basketball?" Marcus shrugged weakly. "I made the winning shot." His father chuckled. "You collapsed before anyone could celebrate." Marcus sighed dramatically. "So, does that count as ruining the moment?" Sarah laughed through her tears. "You always know how to make us smile." Marcus looked at both of them. "I'll be okay." Neither parent answered. Instead, Sarah kissed his forehead. David squeezed his shoulder. Both silently prayed he was right. Over the next 2 days, hospital life became strangely normal. Friends visited. Teachers sent messages. Neighbors brought food. Grandma Helen barely left Marcus's bedside. "My handsome grandson. You'll be chasing girls again before you know it." Marcus laughed. "Grandma, I'm serious. You've got too much charm to stay in this hospital." Lily rolled her eyes. "He barely talks to girls." Marcus pointed at her. "Traitor." The room filled with laughter. Even the nurses smiled. Looking at them, no one could imagine that this family was standing on the edge of complete destruction. Late the following afternoon, a nurse approached David. "Mr. Carter? Could you come with me for a moment?" David stood. "Is Marcus worse?"
No.
"The doctor simply wants to discuss one of the laboratory reports." Sarah smiled. "Go. I'll stay with Marcus." David followed the nurse through several long hallways. He noticed they weren't walking toward Marcus's specialist. Instead, they entered a small consultation room. A cardiologist sat beside another physician David hadn't met before. The second doctor introduced herself.
I'm Dr. Emily Foster.
"I oversee our hospital's genetics department." David frowned. "Genetics?" The doctors exchanged uneasy glances. Immediately, David's stomach tightened. "What happened?" Dr. Foster carefully placed a sealed folder on the table. "There appears to be an unexpected result from your family's compatibility testing." David leaned forward. "Okay. We'll repeat whatever test you need. We already have." Silence. "We repeated it twice." David stared at her.
I'm sorry.
"I don't understand." Dr. Foster inhaled slowly. The compatibility test raised questions. "So we performed relationship verification before continuing donor analysis." David's heartbeat quickened. "What questions?" The room became painfully quiet. Even the air conditioner suddenly sounded loud. Finally, Dr. Foster looked directly into his eyes. "Mr. Carter, the laboratory results indicate that Marcus is not biologically related to you." David blinked, then smiled awkwardly.
I'm sorry.
"I think you have the wrong file. We've confirmed your identity multiple times."
No.
David shook his head.
No.
"Run it again." "We already did."
No.
"My son looks exactly like me." "We repeated every procedure. There was no contamination, no sample mix-up, no laboratory error." David slowly stood from his chair. "This is ridiculous. My wife and I have been married for 17 years. Dr. Foster's voice remained calm. "I understand this information is devastating."
No.
David's voice became louder. "You don't understand anything. That boy is my son. I was there when he was born. I held him before anyone else. I taught him how to ride a bicycle. I helped him with homework. I've never missed one birthday." His breathing became uneven. "So don't sit there and tell me." "He isn't mine." Neither doctor spoke, because there was nothing left to say. David grabbed the folder with trembling hands. He looked at the report. His name, Marcus's name, the unmistakable conclusion, probability of biological paternity, 0%. The paper slipped from his fingers onto the floor. For several long seconds, he simply stood there, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to accept that 4 numbers on a laboratory report had just shattered everything he believed about his life. Before the doctors could say another word, David turned, threw open the consultation room door, and walked out into the hallway. He had only one thought racing through his mind. Someone was lying. And before this night was over, he was going to find out who. David walked blindly through the hospital corridor, barely noticing the nurses and patients stepping aside as he passed. His ears rang. His hands trembled so violently that he had to grip the folder against his chest to stop it from falling again.
No.
He whispered it once, then again. No, no, no. This couldn't be happening. Not to him, not to his family. By the time he reached the parking lot, his breathing had become ragged. He leaned against his truck and squeezed his eyes shut. He remembered the day Marcus was born. The tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. The sleepless nights. The first time Marcus called him Dad. The scraped knees. The father-son camping trips. The endless basketball practices. Every memory screamed the same thing. That's my son. A laboratory report couldn't erase 16 years. Could it? His phone buzzed. Sarah. He stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A second later, it rang again. He finally answered. David. Her voice was soft. Where are you? They said the doctor only needed a few minutes. He swallowed hard. I needed some air. Are you okay? He looked at the report again. Was he okay? His entire world had just cracked open. David. I'm fine. You don't sound fine. I'll be back. He hung up before she could ask another question. For nearly 10 minutes, he remained beside the truck, trying to force himself to think logically. There had to be an explanation. Hospitals made mistakes. Laboratories mixed up samples. Machines failed. People were wrong. The report had to be wrong. There was only one way to prove it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone again. Hello. A voice answered. Good afternoon. Genesis DNA Laboratory. How may I help you? My name is David Carter. I need a private paternity test. Certainly, sir. The earliest appointment is tomorrow morning. I'll take it. Would you like anyone else present?
No.
I'll come alone. The woman explained the procedure. David barely heard her. As soon as the call ended, he folded the report and shoved it deep into his jacket pocket. No one was going to see it. Not until he knew the truth. When he returned to Marcus's hospital room, Sarah immediately noticed something had changed. His smile looked forced. His eyes looked empty. She stood. What did the doctor say? David forced himself to keep walking until he reached Marcus's bedside. Nothing serious. Marcus looked up from his phone. So, am I dying? Sarah gasped. Marcus. What? He shrugged. No one tells me anything. David sat beside him. You aren't dying. Marcus searched his father's face. You promise. David hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second, then nodded. I promise. Marcus smiled. Good. Because I still have to beat you in basketball. David chuckled automatically. You've been saying that for years. And one day it'll happen. Lily laughed from the corner. In your dreams. Marcus pointed at her dramatically. You're supposed to support your brother. I'm supporting reality. Grandma Helen burst into laughter. There they go again. The room filled with light-hearted teasing. David smiled when everyone else smiled. He laughed when everyone else laughed. But inside, he wasn't hearing a single word. He found himself studying Marcus. The shape of his nose. The curve of his smile. His brown eyes. Had they always looked different? Or was his mind searching for differences that had never mattered before? Marcus noticed. What? David blinked. What do you mean? You keep staring at me. David quickly looked away. Nothing. You've got something on your face. Marcus wiped his cheek. Did I get it? David nodded. Yeah. It was a lie. There had been nothing there. Sarah watched the exchange with quiet concern. She had been married to David for 17 years. She knew every expression on his face. And this one, she had never seen before. Later that evening, Sarah walked into the hospital cafeteria carrying 2 cups of coffee. David was sitting alone by the window. She placed 1 cup in front of him. You've barely said 10 words in the last hour.
I'm tired.
So am I. She sat across from him. But this feels different. He stared out the window. You ever wonder? He stopped. She tilted her head. Wonder what? He almost asked. Almost. Instead, he shook his head. Nothing. Sarah reached across the table and held his hand. We're going to get through this. We always do. David looked at her. The woman he had loved since college. The woman he had trusted with every secret. The woman who had stood beside him through every triumph and every disappointment. Could she really have betrayed him? No, she couldn't have. But then, How did the report say otherwise? David. Talk to me. I'm just worried about Marcus. She squeezed his hand. So am I. We'll face it together. Those words pierced him like a knife. Together. Were they still together? Or had their marriage been a lie for 16 years? The next morning, before sunrise, David quietly left the hospital. He didn't tell Sarah where he was going. At exactly 8 o'clock, he walked into Genesis DNA laboratory. The receptionist smiled politely. Mr. Carter? Yes. This way, please. A technician collected a cheek swab. We'll need a sample from the child. David had planned for that. The previous evening, Marcus had used a disposable toothbrush provided by the hospital. David had slipped it into a sealed plastic bag before anyone noticed. He handed it over. The technician labeled both samples. Results can be expedited. 24 hours. David nodded. I'll pay whatever it costs. As he signed the paperwork, the technician smiled reassuringly. Most people are nervous. David let out a hollow laugh. You have no idea. Back at the hospital, Sarah was waiting outside Marcus's room. Where were you? I went home to shower. She frowned. You could have told me. I didn't want to wake you. She studied him carefully. You've never lied well. His heart skipped. What? I said. She smiled faintly. You've never lied well. For one terrifying second, David thought she somehow knew about the report. Instead, she simply kissed his cheek. Go see Marcus. He's been asking for you. David watched her walk away. Guilt settled heavily in his chest. He hated lying to her, unless she was lying to him first. Marcus looked up as his father entered. There you are. I thought you abandoned me. David smiled. Not a chance. Marcus lowered his voice. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Marcus hesitated. You think Mom's scared? David glanced toward the hallway. Why? She cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. David's throat tightened. She's scared because she loves you. Marcus nodded slowly. I wish I could tell her it'll be okay. You can. What if it isn't? David pulled his chair closer. Listen to me. Marcus met his eyes. No matter what happens, you'll never face it alone. Marcus smiled. I know. You've always been there. Those simple words shattered something inside David. He had always been there. Every scraped knee, every fever, every school recital, every broken heart. No DNA test could erase those moments. And yet, someone had stolen the certainty that had defined his life. As father and son sat together in silence, neither of them noticed Sarah standing just outside the partially open door. She wasn't smiling anymore. She had heard enough to know one thing. Something was terribly wrong with her husband. And whatever he was hiding, it was getting bigger by the hour. Sarah waited until Marcus fell asleep before quietly closing his hospital room door. She caught up with David near the vending machines. Can we talk? David forced a smile. Sure. She folded her arms. No. No pretending. I know something happened yesterday. He looked away. Nothing happened. She laughed bitterly. You've been married to me for 17 years. You forget. I know every version of your face. The happy one, the angry one, the exhausted one, and the one you're wearing now. She stepped closer. I've never seen this one. David's jaw tightened. I'm just stressed. So am I. Our son is lying in a hospital bed.
I'm terrified.
But we're supposed to lean on each other. Instead, she reached for his hand. He instinctively pulled it away. Sarah froze. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't violent. It was just tiny movement. But in 17 years of marriage, David had never pulled away from her. Not once. Her eyes slowly filled with tears. You don't even want me touching you. David immediately regretted it. Sarah, what did I do? You didn't do anything. Then why are you looking at me like I'm a stranger? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because if he spoke now, everything would explode. Sarah searched his face one last time, then quietly nodded. When you're ready to tell me the truth, I'll be waiting. She walked away. David watched her disappear around the corner. For the first time since the doctor's office, he questioned himself. What if she truly had no idea? What if she was as innocent as she claimed? Then why did the report say Marcus wasn't his son? The following afternoon, David's phone vibrated. Genesis DNA Laboratory. His heart stopped. He answered immediately. This is David. Mr. Carter? Your expedited results are ready. His mouth went dry. Can you tell me over the phone?
I'm sorry.
We require you to collect them in person. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call without another word. His hands were already shaking. The drive felt endless. Every red light seemed intentional. Every slow driver became unbearable. When he finally reached the laboratory, he almost ran inside. The receptionist recognized him. Mr. Carter. She handed him a sealed envelope. There you go. He stared at it. His entire future was inside that envelope. The receptionist smiled politely. Would you like a private room? He nodded silently. A technician led him into a small office. There are tissues if you need them. David frowned. Why would I? The technician simply offered a sympathetic smile before leaving. The door clicked shut. David sat down. He stared at the envelope for nearly a minute. His breathing became uneven.
No.
I'm opening it. He slid his finger beneath the seal, pulled out the report, skipped straight to the conclusion. His eyes locked onto one sentence. Probability of paternity, 0%. He blinked. Read it again. Then again. The words never changed. The room suddenly felt too small. He lowered the report onto the desk. His chest tightened. His vision blurred. A single tear landed on the paper.
No.
He whispered. This can't be. He slammed his fist onto the desk. It can't be. No one answered. There was no mistake. No faulty machine. No mixed samples. Two completely different laboratories had reached the exact same conclusion. Marcus was not biologically his son. David covered his face with both hands. For several minutes, he simply cried. Not loud, not dramatically, just the quiet, broken sobs of a man watching 17 years of certainty disappear. That evening, he drove aimlessly through town instead of returning to the hospital. He passed Marcus's elementary school, the baseball field where they'd spent countless Saturdays, the ice cream shop Marcus loved. Every place carried a memory. Every memory suddenly came with a question. Had his entire life been built on a lie? His phone rang. Sarah again. He ignored it. It rang a second time, then a third. Finally, a text appeared. Where are you? Marcus keeps asking for you. David gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He couldn't face Marcus. Not yet. He couldn't look into those familiar eyes without hearing the words. 0%. Back at the hospital, Marcus looked toward the doorway every few seconds. Mom. Yeah. Did Dad go home? Sarah forced a smile. I think he had to take care of something. Marcus frowned. He never misses visiting hours. I know. Grandma Helen noticed Sarah's worried expression. Everything okay? Sarah hesitated. I don't know. Helen lowered her voice. Did you two argue?
No.
Then what's wrong? Sarah sighed. It's like. She searched for the right words. It's like he woke up one morning and became someone else. Grandma Helen looked toward the empty doorway. David loves this family more than anything. I know. Then trust him. Sarah nodded. She wanted to. She truly did. But trust became difficult when the person you loved refused to tell you why they were hurting. David finally returned after sunset. Marcus immediately smiled. There he is. I was starting to think you traded me for another kid. The joke hit David like a punch. He forced a laugh. You'd be impossible to replace. Marcus grinned. I know. Sarah quietly watched her husband. His smile never reached his eyes. She knew him too well. Something inside him had broken. She just didn't know what. Marcus looked between them. Can I ask something? David nodded. Sure. When I get out of here, can we still go on our camping trip? David swallowed. The camping trip. Their annual father-son tradition. Just the two of them. Fishing. Campfires. Terrible jokes.
No phones. No distractions.
Some of his happiest memories. He smiled. Of course. Marcus extended his fist. Promise. David touched his son's fist. I promise. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. Then David noticed Sarah watching him. There was pain in her eyes, confusion, fear, and one silent question. Why are you pretending everything is okay? Later that night, David stood alone outside the hospital entrance. Rain had begun to fall. He barely noticed. He pulled the DNA report from his jacket one more time. He stared at it until the ink blurred beneath the raindrops. Then, a memory surfaced. 16 years earlier, the delivery room. Sarah had been unconscious after an emergency cesarean section. A nurse had carried Marcus away for what felt like forever. David remembered asking, "Where are you taking my son?" The nurse had smiled. Routine examinations. He hadn't questioned it. Why would he? Hospitals knew what they were doing. But now, that memory felt different. How long had Marcus actually been away? 10 minutes? 30? An hour? He honestly couldn't remember. Another memory followed. The maternity ward had been unusually chaotic. Doctors running, nurses whispering. At the time, everyone said there had been an electrical failure that delayed several procedures. David had forgotten about it. Until now, his heartbeat quickened. What if? He whispered to himself. What if this isn't about Sarah? The thought struck him like lightning. What if Sarah had never cheated? What if Marcus wasn't biologically his? Because something had happened at the hospital? It sounded impossible, ridiculous. Yet somehow, it made more sense than believing the woman he loved had hidden an affair for 16 years. He looked back toward the glowing hospital windows. If there was even the slightest chance that something had happened the day Marcus was born, he wasn't going to stop until he uncovered the truth. Even if that truth destroyed far more lives than his own. He folded the report carefully and slipped it back into his pocket. For the first time since the nightmare began, his anger shifted. It was no longer directed at Sarah. It was directed at the possibility that someone, somewhere, had stolen the truth from both of them. And he had no idea that someone had been praying for 16 years that this exact day would never come. David didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, the same question echoed through his mind. What really happened 16 years ago? By sunrise, he had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to accuse Sarah. Not yet. He needed answers before he destroyed his marriage. If there had been a mistake, if there had been some unimaginable error, he had to know. The next morning, Marcus was sitting up in bed eating pancakes when David walked into the room carrying a bag of fresh fruit. There he is, Marcus said with a grin. I was beginning to think hospitals had banned dads. David laughed. I called ahead. They told me you're the worst patient on this floor. Marcus pointed his fork at him. That's slander. I've been nothing but charming. A nurse walked in just then. She smiled. I can confirm he asks for extra pudding every night. Marcus looked offended. I ask politely. The nurse laughed. That part is true. For a few moments, everything felt wonderfully normal. Sarah watched David joke with Marcus. It was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in days. She silently thanked God. Maybe whatever had been bothering him was finally passing. She couldn't have been more wrong. An hour later, Marcus was taken downstairs for another round of scans. The moment the room was empty, David turned toward Sarah. I need to ask you something. She looked relieved. Finally. I've been waiting. He pulled 2 chairs closer. His voice was calm. Too calm. Do you remember the day Marcus was born? She smiled immediately. Every second. I don't. Her smile faded. What do you mean? I remember pieces. I remember you going into surgery. I remember hearing him cry. I remember holding him. But, he leaned forward. Do you remember anything unusual? Sarah frowned. Unusual? Like what? A delay. A mix-up. Confusion. Anything. She searched her memory. The delivery became an emergency. I lost a lot of blood. I remember waking up exhausted. The nurse brought Marcus to me later. David's eyes narrowed. How much later? I don't know. Maybe an hour. Maybe longer. I was barely conscious. She shook her head. David, why are you asking me this? He hesitated. I've been thinking. About what? He almost told her. The words reached his lips, then stopped. Not yet. I've just been remembering things. Sarah stared at him. That's not what this is. You've never been good at hiding things. He smiled weakly. You always say that. Because it's true. She reached across the small table. This is bigger than Marcus being sick. Isn't it? David looked down. Silence answered for him. Just then, Grandma Helen walked into the room carrying coffee. I leave for 5 minutes and suddenly everybody looks miserable. She handed Sarah a cup. You too need caffeine. Sarah smiled. Thank you. Helen looked at David. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't. Worry won't heal Marcus. I know. Helen sat down. You know. She looked toward the empty hospital bed. When Marcus was born, I remember thinking he looked nothing like either of you. David looked up sharply. What? Helen laughed. Oh, don't overthink it. Newborn babies all look funny. But I remember teasing Sarah. I said. She chuckled. Are you sure they gave you the right baby? Sarah laughed. I remember that. You wouldn't stop joking about it. Helen nodded. The nurse looked horrified. David froze. The nurse? Yes. It was strange. I thought she'd laugh. Instead, Helen frowned, trying to remember. She became very serious. What exactly did she say? David asked. Helen closed her eyes. It was something like, please don't joke about that. Sarah smiled. She probably thought you'd scare me.
No.
Helen slowly shook her head. It felt different. David leaned closer. What do you mean? I don't know. She looked nervous. The room fell silent. Sarah finally laughed awkwardly. We're reading too much into an old memory. Helen nodded. Probably. But David wasn't so sure anymore. That afternoon, while Sarah stayed with Marcus, David walked downstairs to the hospital's records department. A young employee greeted him. Good afternoon. Can I help you? Yes. I'd like copies of my son's birth records. Certainly. She typed for several seconds, then frowned. What? I'm only seeing the digital file. I need the original records. The delivery notes. The nursing reports. The admission log. She looked uncomfortable.
I'm sorry.
The originals were archived years ago. Can you retrieve them? They're usually available. She typed again. Her expression changed. That's odd. What? The archive number is blank. What does that mean? She looked at him uncertainly. It means the physical file isn't showing up. So where is it? I honestly don't know. David's heartbeat quickened. Can someone find it? I'll ask my supervisor. She disappeared through a back door. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, an older man wearing an administrator's badge approached. Mr. Carter? Yes.
I'm Richard Lawson.
Director of Medical Records. David stood. My son's original birth records are missing. Lawson offered a polite smile. I'm sure it's just a filing error. How long will it take to find them? The administrator folded his hands. I'm afraid records from that period were affected by a storage flood many years ago. David frowned. So they're destroyed? Some were. But the digital copies remain. I don't want digital copies. I want the originals.
I'm sorry.
They're unavailable. David stared at him. The answer sounded rehearsed. Too rehearsed. Has anyone else ever requested those records? Lawson blinked.
I'm sorry.
My son's birth file. Has anyone asked for it before today? A brief hesitation. So far as I know.
No.
David noticed it. That tiny pause. Barely a second. But it was there. Enough to make every instinct in his body scream that something wasn't right. He thanked the administrator and walked away. Halfway down the hallway he stopped, then quietly turned around. Lawson was standing exactly where David had left him. Watching. The moment their eyes met, Lawson quickly looked away and disappeared into his office. David's pulse accelerated. This wasn't over. Inside that office, Richard Lawson immediately closed the door. His hands were trembling. He opened an old locked cabinet, reached inside, pulled out a worn brown envelope. Across the front, faded handwriting read, "Carter, confidential." He stared at it for several long seconds, then whispered to himself, "I prayed this day would never come." He picked up the phone with shaking fingers. A number he hadn't dialed in over a decade. It rang twice. A man's voice answered. "Hello." Lawson swallowed hard. "It's Richard." There was silence. Then, "What happened?" Lawson looked toward the office window, making sure no one was nearby. "They're asking questions." Another pause. "Who?" "The Carter family." The voice on the other end became noticeably tense. "How much do they know?" "Not enough. But they're getting close." The man exhaled slowly. "You know what happens if the truth comes out." Lawson closed his eyes. "I know. You need to handle it. And Richard, if you value your freedom, make sure those files are never found." The line went dead. Lawson lowered the phone. His reflection stared back at him from the dark office window. For 16 years, he had convinced himself the past was buried forever. Now, the past was coming back. And it was coming for everyone. Richard Lawson sat motionless long after the call had ended. The silence inside his office was suffocating. His eyes drifted back to the old brown envelope lying on his desk. "Carter, confidential." His fingers hovered over it. For a moment, he almost opened it. Instead, he shoved it back into the cabinet, locked the drawer, and slipped the key into his pocket. "No one can ever see that file," he whispered. Then he stood, straightened his tie, and walked out of the office as if nothing had happened. David wasn't convinced. The administrator's reaction replayed in his mind over and over. The hesitation, the nervous smile, the phone call he had almost certainly made after David left. Something was wrong. He could feel it. As he stepped into the hospital lobby, his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello, Mr. Carter?" "Yes. My name is Detective Laura Mitchell." David frowned. "Detective, I'm calling because your request for historical hospital records triggered a notification." "A notification?" "Yes. There was an internal review involving this hospital many years ago." David stopped walking. "What kind of review?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss that over the phone." His pulse quickened. "Then why are you calling?" There was a brief pause. "Because if you're asking questions about births that occurred 16 years ago, you need to be very careful." David's heart began pounding. "What do you mean?" "I'm saying, you may uncover something much bigger than your own family." The line went silent for a second. Then she added, "If you want answers, meet me tomorrow." Before David could ask another question, she hung up. He stared at the phone. Who was she? How did she know he had requested records? And why had she sounded afraid? When David returned to Marcus's room, he forced himself to act normal. Marcus was laughing at something on television. "There he is." David smiled. "What are we watching?" "A cooking competition." David raised an eyebrow. "You hate cooking shows." "I know. But one chef just dropped an entire cake." David laughed. "I have to admit, that's impressive." Marcus grinned. "I've watched it 3 times. Sarah smiled as she watched them. For the first time in days, father and son looked like themselves again. She quietly walked over to David. "Can I borrow you for a minute?" He nodded. The two of them stepped into the hallway. Sarah folded her arms. I've decided something. David looked at her. What? When Marcus gets better. We're taking a vacation. He smiled faintly. A vacation?
No phones.
No work.
No excuses.
Just us. Our family needs it. David looked away. Did they? Or was the family she wanted to save already beyond saving? Sarah gently touched his arm. I miss you. His throat tightened. I've been right here.
No.
She shook her head. Your body has. But your heart hasn't. She searched his face. Please tell me what's happening. I can't. You can't. Or you won't. David remained silent. A tear rolled down Sarah's cheek. I've stood beside you through every difficult season. When your business almost collapsed, I stayed. When your father died, I stayed. When we couldn't afford this house, I stayed. So why? Why won't you let me stand beside you now? David felt like his chest was being crushed. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to pull the DNA report from his pocket. He wanted to ask her if she had ever betrayed him. But what if she was innocent? One accusation could destroy everything. He couldn't risk it. Not without proof. I'm sorry, he whispered. Sarah nodded slowly. I know. But sorry isn't an answer. She walked back into Marcus's room. David remained in the hallway, watching the woman he loved drift farther away with every secret he kept. That evening, Marcus's doctor entered with encouraging news. I've got some good updates. Everyone immediately looked up. Marcus smiled. Can I go home? The doctor laughed. Not today. But your treatment is working. Sarah squeezed Marcus's hand. That's wonderful. We'll continue monitoring you for another couple of days. Marcus sighed dramatically. So, no basketball? The doctor smiled. No basketball. No running.
No lifting.
No trying to impress your friends. Marcus looked horrified. So basically, no fun. The room laughed. The tension briefly disappeared. Then the doctor looked toward David. Mr. Carter, when you have a moment, I'd like to discuss the donor testing. David's stomach tightened. I'll be there. A few minutes later, they met privately. The donor search is becoming more complicated, the doctor explained. David nodded. I understand. We'll likely need to expand beyond immediate family. David stared at the floor. I expected that. The doctor studied him carefully. I know Dr. Foster spoke with you. David looked up sharply. I want you to understand something. The laboratory findings don't change who you are to Marcus. David's voice cracked. Maybe not. But they change everything else. The doctor remained quiet. After a moment, he said, I've seen families survive discoveries like this. David laughed bitterly. Have you? Yes. And I've seen families destroyed because people stopped talking. The words lingered. David thanked him and left. But he couldn't shake what the doctor had said. People stopped talking. Maybe that was exactly what was happening. The next morning, before anyone else woke up, David quietly left the hospital. He drove to the address Detective Mitchell had given him. A small coffee shop on the edge of town. She was already there. Early 40s. Plain clothes.
No badge visible.
She motioned for him to sit. You came. You said I should. She studied him for a long moment. You look exhausted. I haven't slept. I didn't think you would. A waitress poured coffee. Neither of them touched it. Finally, David leaned forward. You said there was an investigation. There was. What kind? Detective Mitchell took a slow breath. 16 years ago, there were allegations involving the maternity ward at St. Mary's Hospital. David's heartbeat accelerated. Allegations of what? She glanced around the cafe before answering. Missing records. Improper documentation. Conflicting newborn identification logs. David's hands tightened around his coffee cup. Were babies switched? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her briefcase, pulled out a thin folder, and slid a single newspaper clipping across the table. The headline read, Hospital employee claims maternity cover-up, dies before testifying. David looked up in disbelief. What is this? The reason I'm meeting you. He read the article. A nurse named Margaret Ellis had accused hospital administrators of hiding serious irregularities involving newborn records. Before she could give a sworn statement, she died in what police ruled a car accident. David looked back at the detective. You don't believe it was an accident? Mitchell's eyes locked onto his.
No.
I never did. She leaned closer. And now, after 16 years, someone has started asking the same questions Margaret Ellis died trying to answer. David felt a chill run down his spine. The detective's next words made it even worse. Mr. Carter, I don't think your family's story begins with a DNA test. I think it began the day your son was born. She paused, then quietly added, and I think someone is willing to do almost anything to make sure the truth stays buried. David stared at the yellowed newspaper clipping for what felt like an eternity. The photograph showed a smiling woman in a nurse's uniform. Margaret Ellis. She couldn't have been older than 50. There was kindness in her eyes, the kind of face people instinctively trusted. He looked back at Detective Mitchell. Tell me everything. She sighed. I wish I could. What do you mean? I was a rookie detective back then. I wasn't assigned to the case. But I watched it unfold. She stirred her untouched coffee absent-mindedly. Margaret Ellis walked into the police department one Monday morning carrying 3 boxes. David frowned. What was in them? Hospital records, birth logs, internal memos, photographs. She claimed there had been irregularities in the maternity ward. David leaned closer. Irregularities? Mitchell nodded. According to her, several newborn identification bracelets didn't match the delivery logs. David's heartbeat quickened. She believed babies had been switched? She believed at least one had. David's mouth went dry. What happened next? Mitchell's expression darkened. She agreed to testify. We scheduled an interview, but she never arrived. David already knew the answer. The accident. Mitchell nodded. Her car left the highway just before sunrise. The official report said she fell asleep behind the wheel. You don't believe that?
No.
Neither did several detectives. So why wasn't it investigated? She gave a bitter smile. Because powerful people became involved. David frowned. What kind of powerful people? She hesitated. I can't answer that. Why not? Because I don't have proof. I only have suspicions. And after 16 years, suspicions aren't enough. David rubbed his forehead. So you're telling me a nurse tried exposing something? She died. And everyone simply moved on? Mitchell looked him straight in the eye.
No.
They were made to move on. Silence settled over the table. Finally, David asked the question that terrified him most. Do you think Marcus was switched at birth? Mitchell answered honestly. I don't know. But I think you're asking exactly the right question. Back at St. Mary's Hospital, Sarah sat beside Marcus's bed while he worked on homework from school. Lily was drawing quietly in a sketchbook. Grandma Helen was knitting a scarf. Everything looked peaceful. Until Sarah looked at the empty chair beside Marcus's bed. Dad's taking a long time. Marcus shrugged. He'll be back. He always comes back. Sarah forced herself to smile. I know, but she wasn't sure anymore. David had never become this distant. Not even when his father died. Not even when they lost their first house during the recession. Something had changed him. She just didn't know what. David returned nearly 2 hours later. Marcus immediately looked up. There you are. David smiled.
Sorry.
I got caught up. Marcus narrowed his eyes dramatically. Were you buying me presents? David laughed. Nice try. Worth asking. Lily smiled. You never stop trying. Marcus grinned. That's why life is exciting. Everyone laughed. Everyone, except Sarah. She noticed something new. David's shoes were dusty. His shirt had fresh coffee stains. He hadn't been home. He hadn't been shopping. He had been somewhere else. Again. And once again, he wasn't telling her. That evening, after Marcus fell asleep, Sarah found David standing alone outside the hospital entrance. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement. She walked beside him. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, she broke the silence. "Are you seeing someone?" David turned sharply. "What? Answer me." His face filled with disbelief. "Sarah, I'm serious. You're disappearing. You barely talk to me. You leave without explaining where you're going. I need to know." His heart sank. "You think I'm having an affair?" Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know what to think anymore." David immediately shook his head.
No.
"Never. Not once." She searched his face. "Then what is it?" He closed his eyes. He had imagined this conversation dozens of times over the past few days. None of the versions ended well. "I can't tell you." Sarah laughed through her tears. "Do you hear yourself? You can't tell your own wife?" "I will." "When?" "Soon." "That's not good enough." She stepped back. "I deserve the truth." "You do." "Then tell me." David's voice barely rose above a whisper. "I can't." Sarah wiped away another tear. "You know what's funny?" He looked at her. "I've spent the last 3 days wondering if you still trusted me." She smiled sadly. "But I never stopped trusting you." She paused. "I just realized. You stopped trusting me." Those words landed harder than any slap. David couldn't answer. Because she was right. She looked at him one final time. "I don't know what happened. But whatever it is, it's already destroying us." She turned and walked back inside. David remained standing in the rain, completely alone. The following morning, Detective Mitchell called. "I need to show you something." David immediately answered. "Where?" "The old county records building. Meet me in 30 minutes. When David arrived, Mitchell was waiting beside several dusty archive boxes. She handed him a pair of gloves. "What's this?" "Hospital inspection records. They were scheduled to be destroyed years ago. But somehow, they weren't." Together they began searching through hundreds of documents. Inspection reports, fire safety certificates, staff rosters, maintenance logs. Nothing. An hour passed. Then another. David sighed. "We're wasting our time." Mitchell didn't answer. She pulled another folder from the bottom of the box. "Wait." She slowly opened it. Inside was a faded maintenance report. Emergency generator failure. Date: October 18th, 16 years earlier. David's eyes widened. The day Marcus was born. Mitchell nodded. She continued reading aloud. Power outage lasting 43 minutes. Backup generator delayed. Maternity ward temporarily operating under emergency procedures. David remembered. The nurses mentioned a power failure. Mitchell kept reading, then suddenly stopped. "What?" She turned the page. Her expression changed completely. She swallowed. There were 6 babies in the maternity ward that night. David stared at the page. 6. Mitchell nodded. And according to this, she pointed to another line. All newborn identification systems were temporarily unavailable during the outage. David's pulse began racing. What does that mean? It means, for 43 minutes, the hospital had no electronic way to confirm which baby belonged to which parents. David felt the room spinning. Mitchell looked at him gravely. If procedures weren't followed perfectly, the consequences would have been catastrophic. David whispered, "Oh my God!" Before either of them could say another word, Mitchell's phone rang. She answered. "Mitchell." The color drained from her face. "What?" She listened silently, then slowly lowered the phone. David immediately stood. "What happened?" She looked at him. "The archive supervisor just called." "What about?" "The box containing the original maternity records." She paused. "Has disappeared." David frowned. "Disappeared. It was here this morning. And now, it's gone." The two of them looked at each other. Neither needed to say it. Someone else knew they were getting close. and that someone had just made the first move. Marcus couldn't sleep. The heart monitor beeped steadily beside his bed, but his mind refused to slow down. He looked toward the empty chair where his father usually sat. "Dad's acting weird." Lily looked up from the book she had been pretending to read. "You noticed too?" Marcus nodded. "He keeps looking at me. Like," he searched for the right words, "like he's trying to figure something out." Lily shrugged. "Maybe he's just worried."
No.
Marcus shook his head. "It's different. You know when Dad lies?" Lily smiled. "He smiles too much." "Exactly. And he's been smiling too much." Sarah, who was quietly arranging flowers on the windowsill, froze. She hadn't realized the children had noticed. Marcus sighed. "I just want everything to go back to normal." Sarah forced herself to smile. "It will." Marcus looked at her. "You promise?" She hesitated. "I promise." But for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she could keep one. Across town, David sat inside Detective Mitchell's car. Neither of them spoke for nearly 5 minutes. The missing archive box had changed everything. Mitchell finally broke the silence. "Boxes don't disappear." David nodded. "Someone took it." "Exactly. And they took it before we could." David stared through the windshield. "So somebody's watching." Mitchell didn't answer immediately. Then she quietly said, "Not somebody. Several people." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" She reached into her briefcase and removed another folder. "I've been digging into the names of everyone who worked in the maternity ward the night Marcus was born." She spread 6 photographs across the dashboard. 6 nurses, 2 doctors, 1 administrator. David studied the faces. Most were retired. 2 had passed away. 1 had moved overseas. Then his eyes stopped on a familiar face. He picked up the photograph. "Richard Lawson." Mitchell nodded. "He wasn't director of medical records back then." "What was he?" "Night operations supervisor." David's heartbeat quickened. "He was there." He signed every emergency incident report during the blackout. David looked at the picture again. Lawson's smile suddenly looked fake. "What are the chances?" Mitchell answered without hesitation. "Too high to ignore." At that exact moment, Richard Lawson was standing inside the basement archives of St. Mary's Hospital. A flashlight illuminated rows of dusty shelves. He unlocked a steel cabinet hidden behind stacks of outdated equipment. Inside sat 3 old archive boxes. One of them had a fresh label, County Records. Lawson carefully opened it. The missing box. He exhaled slowly.
I'm sorry.
He wasn't talking to himself. He was talking to the files. "I never wanted this." His hands trembled as he flipped through dozens of documents. Delivery logs, bracelet numbers, nursing schedules. Then, he found it. A handwritten incident report. His face went pale.
No.
He whispered, "I thought this was destroyed." He quickly pulled the paper out. Across the top, someone had written in red ink, "Identification error. Immediate review required." Lawson closed his eyes. He remembered that night as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. The screams, the darkness, the alarms, the panic, and one decision, one terrible decision, that changed everything. 16 years earlier, the maternity ward was in complete darkness. Emergency lights flickered weakly. Nurses rushed from room to room carrying flashlights. A newborn cried loudly. Then another. Someone shouted, "We've lost power to the nursery." Another voice yelled, "Bring the portable generators." Margaret Ellis held 2 newborn babies close to her chest. "Where's Nurse Daniels?" "I can't find her." Another nurse ran toward her. "The bracelets aren't printing." Margaret frowned. "What?" "The computer system crashed." "We'll do them manually." "Hurry!" The babies continued crying. Doctors shouted instructions. Parents asked frightened questions. The entire floor had descended into chaos. Then, someone screamed, "We've got another emergency C-section." Every available nurse rushed away. leaving Margaret alone with the babies. She looked from one infant to the other, then toward the hallway. "I'll only be gone a minute." She placed both bassinets side by side, covered them carefully, and hurried toward the operating room. She had no idea. Someone else had just entered the nursery. Back in the present, David stared at the photographs spread across Mitchell's dashboard. "Can we talk to the nurses?" Mitchell sighed. "I've tried." "What happened?" 3 refused. 1 has dementia. 1 died. And the last one, she looked at him, disappeared. David frowned. Disappeared. No forwarding address. No employment records. No driver's license renewal. It's like she vanished. Who was she? Mitchell slid another photograph toward him. A young nurse smiled brightly into the camera. Nurse Angela Daniels. David turned the photo over. On the back was an address. "Is this current?"
No.
It was her last known residence. David looked at Mitchell. "We're going." 2 hours later, they arrived at a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town. The house looked abandoned. Paint peeled from the walls. The front yard was overgrown. David knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. As they turned to leave, an elderly woman watering flowers next door called out, "Looking for Angela?" Mitchell walked over. "Yes. You know her?" The woman nodded sadly. "I did. Does she still live here?"
No.
"When did she leave?" The woman frowned. "Oh, about 15 years ago. She left overnight. Didn't even pack half her furniture." David exchanged a glance with Mitchell. "Did she say where she was going?" The neighbor slowly shook her head.
No.
"But I remember something strange." "What?" 2 men came the night before. They argued with her for almost an hour. "What about?" "I couldn't hear. But she was crying." The woman lowered her voice. "The next morning, she was gone." David felt a chill run through him. Did anyone ever hear from her again? The neighbor looked down.
No.
"It's like she disappeared from the face of the earth." Meanwhile, inside St. Mary's Hospital, Sarah finally reached her breaking point. David had been gone nearly the entire day. Again, she stepped into the hallway and dialed his number. It rang. No answer. She tried again. Voicemail. Her frustration finally boiled over. She left a message. "David, I don't know what's happening. I don't know where you keep disappearing to. But I'm done pretending everything is okay. If our marriage means anything to you, call me." She ended the call, then leaned against the wall and cried quietly. Grandma Helen found her moments later. "Oh, sweetheart." Sarah wiped her tears. "I'm fine." Helen gently shook her head.
No.
"You're exhausted."
I'm scared.
"I know." Sarah looked at her mother. "What if he's already left me?" Helen immediately took both of her hands. "Listen to me. I've watched that man love you for 17 years. The way he looks at you, that doesn't disappear overnight. Then why is he shutting me out?" Helen didn't have an answer, and that frightened her more than anything. As evening approached, David and Mitchell prepared to leave the neighborhood. Just as David opened the car door, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. "Hello." Silence. Then, a distorted voice. "Stop looking." David froze. "What?" "You were warned." His heart began pounding. "Who is this?" "If you keep digging, you won't just destroy your family. You'll destroy several." The line crackled. David shouted, "Who are you?" The voice ignored the question. "Some truths were buried for a reason." Click. The call ended. David stared at the phone. Mitchell's expression hardened. "What did they say?" David slowly lowered the device. "They know we're investigating." Mitchell nodded grimly. "I was afraid of that." David looked back toward the abandoned house, then toward the darkening sky. For the first time, this no longer felt like a family mystery. It felt like someone was actively trying to stop them. And if anonymous threats had already begun, he feared what might come next. Because one thing had become painfully clear. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous the truth became. Marcus had never seen his mother cry that much. She smiled whenever she entered his hospital room. She laughed at his jokes. She kissed his forehead every morning. But every night, she disappeared into the hallway. And every night, she came back with red eyes. He wasn't a little boy anymore. He knew something was wrong. Very wrong. That evening, after Lily and Grandma Helen had gone home to get some rest, Marcus quietly looked at his mother. "Mom!" Sarah looked up from her chair. "Yeah, sweetheart. Are you and Dad getting divorced?" The question hit her like a punch. "What?" Marcus looked down at the blanket. "You don't have to lie. I hear things." Sarah immediately moved beside him. "Marcus, why would you ask that?" He swallowed. "Because Dad barely talks. You cry all the time. And when you think I'm sleeping, you both stop pretending." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes again. She cupped his face. "Listen to me. Your father loves you. I know. He loves me too. I know. Then why does it feel like he's leaving?" Sarah couldn't answer, because for the first time, she had begun asking herself the exact same question. She kissed his forehead. "Nothing, and I mean nothing, will ever stop us from being your family." Marcus nodded. He wanted to believe her, but something inside him whispered that life was about to change forever. David sat in Detective Mitchell's office reviewing copies of every document she had managed to recover. Most of it was routine. Shift schedules, maintenance logs, security reports. Nothing connected. Then Mitchell slid another file toward him. "I finally found something." David leaned forward. "What is it?" "Visitor logs. The night Marcus was born." He frowned. "Visitors. Normally, only immediate family were allowed. But because of the blackout, security procedures became chaotic." David scanned the names. Grandparents, husbands, doctors, delivery staff. Then one signature caught his attention. There was no printed name, only initials. "JB. What does this mean?" Mitchell shook her head. "No identificación. No driver's license number. No employee record. So someone entered the maternity ward without being identified." She nodded. "And according to the timestamp, they were there for 23 minutes. David's stomach tightened. "During the blackout." "Exactly." Silence filled the office. Finally David whispered, "Who walks into a maternity ward during a blackout without leaving their name?" Across town, Richard Lawson unlocked the door to his house. He had barely stepped inside when the telephone rang. He looked at the caller ID. Unknown. His face immediately became tense. He answered carefully. "This is Richard." The same distorted voice spoke. "They're asking about the visitor log." Lawson's knees almost gave way. "How do you know that?" "That isn't your concern." Lawson swallowed hard. "I destroyed everything." "Apparently, you missed something." Lawson sat down heavily. "They met Detective Mitchell." "I know. They found Margaret Ellis." "I know." Lawson closed his eyes. "They're getting too close." The voice became colder. "You were supposed to make sure this never happened." "I tried." "Trying isn't enough." "What do you want me to do?" A long silence followed. Then, "Find the Carter family. Before they find the truth." The call disconnected. Lawson remained frozen. His breathing became shallow. "No," he whispered. "I'm not doing that again." But deep inside, he knew he had waited too long. The past had finally caught up with him. The following morning, Marcus was officially cleared to leave the hospital. The doctor smiled as he handed Sarah the discharge papers. "He's responding well. There will be follow-up treatments. But he's strong." Marcus threw both arms into the air. "Freedom." The nurse laughed. "I've never seen anyone so excited to leave hospital food behind." Marcus grinned. "No offense. But your meatloaf tasted like cardboard." Several nurses burst into laughter. Sarah smiled. Felt wonderful hearing him joke again. David arrived just as Marcus was wheeled toward the exit. There he is. Marcus stood and hugged him tightly. I'm finally getting out. David hugged him back. I know. You ready to go home? I've been ready since day 2. David laughed. That sounds about right. As they walked toward the parking lot, Sarah noticed something. David looked relieved. Not because Marcus was healthy, because everyone was together again. She wanted to believe they were finally getting back to normal. She had no idea. The worst hadn't even begun. That evening, the Carter family gathered around the dinner table for the first time in over a week. Grandma Helen had cooked everyone's favorite meal. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread. For a little while, the laughter returned. Marcus smiled. I missed Grandma's cooking. Helen pretended to be offended. You mean you didn't miss me? I missed both. Good answer. Lily laughed. Nice save. David watched his family. This was everything he had ever wanted. Noise, laughter, love. How could one DNA report threaten all of this? Halfway through dinner, Marcus looked at David. Dad. Yeah. When I'm completely better, can we still finish building the treehouse? David smiled. Absolutely. You promised we'd put in electricity. Grandma Helen laughed. Electricity? What are you building? Marcus grinned. The coolest treehouse in the neighborhood. David chuckled. And probably the most expensive. Sarah watched them carefully. For a moment, she saw the old David again. The loving father. The devoted husband. Then his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His smile vanished. Sarah noticed immediately. Everything okay? David stood. I need to take this. He walked into the backyard. Sarah quietly watched through the kitchen window. Her heart sank. Another secret. Another phone call. Another lie. Outside, David answered. Mitchell? It isn't Mitchell. Richard Lawson's voice trembled. Mr. Carter, we need to meet. David frowned. Why? Because people are watching. Who? I can't explain over the phone. David's patience snapped. I've had enough. If you know something, tell me. Lawson looked over his shoulder from inside his own living room. I was there. David froze. What? The night your son was born. His pulse exploded. What are you saying? I saw what happened. David's voice became almost a whisper. Then tell me. I can't. Not here. When? Tomorrow. 7 o'clock. St. Anne's Cemetery. David frowned. A cemetery? No one will follow us there. Before David could ask another question, Lawson hung up. David stood motionless in the dark backyard. He had just spoken to the first person who claimed to know the truth. Inside the house, Sarah watched David slip his phone into his pocket. When he came back inside, she calmly placed her fork on the table. Who was it? David hesitated. Work. Marcus rolled his eyes. Dad, you've used that excuse since I was 8. Everyone laughed. Except Sarah. She quietly stood. I'm going upstairs. David looked surprised. You haven't finished eating. I'm not hungry anymore. She disappeared without another word. The room suddenly became uncomfortable. Marcus looked between his parents. What just happened? David forced another smile. Nothing. Marcus didn't believe him. Neither did Lily, nor Grandma Helen. Everyone could feel the invisible wall growing between David and Sarah. Late that night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. David quietly slipped into bed beside her. Neither spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I know you're lying. David closed his eyes.
I'm sorry.
Please stop saying you're sorry. I don't need apologies. I need honesty. She turned to face him. I've asked myself every possible question. Did I hurt you? Did I disappoint you? Did I fail you somehow? David immediately answered.
No.
You've been an incredible wife. She stared at him. Then why do you look at me like you don't know me anymore? His heart shattered. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to hand her the DNA reports. He wanted to ask every painful question. Instead, he whispered, "I'm trying to protect you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "From what?" David couldn't answer. She slowly nodded. "I understand now." He looked at her.
No.
"I don't think you do." She smiled sadly.
Ido.
"You've already decided I can't carry whatever burden you're carrying." She reached for his hand. He held it tightly. "I married you because I thought we'd face everything together." She squeezed his fingers. "But you're fighting this battle alone." She gently pulled her hand away. "And that's what scares me the most." David lay awake long after Sarah had fallen asleep. Tomorrow, Richard Lawson was finally going to tell him what happened 16 years ago. Or so he hoped. Because somewhere, someone else had already decided Lawson would never get the chance. Richard Lawson arrived at St. Anne's Cemetery 20 minutes early. The sky was gray. A cold wind drifted through the rows of weathered headstones. He looked over his shoulder every few seconds. His hands refused to stop shaking. He wasn't afraid of dying. Not anymore. He was afraid of dying before he corrected the biggest mistake of his life. He walked slowly until he reached an old oak tree near the back of the cemetery. There, he sat on a stone bench and clutched a worn leather briefcase tightly against his chest. Inside it were documents no one was ever supposed to see again. He checked his watch. 6:54 p.m. 6 more minutes. "Please let me make this right," he whispered. Across town, David parked 2 streets away from the cemetery. Detective Mitchell had insisted on coming. "I don't like this," she said as they stepped out of the car. He picked a cemetery. So there are too many blind spots." David looked toward the iron entrance gate. "He said no one would follow us." Mitchell quietly slipped her badge into her jacket. "Let's hope he was right." The two of them walked through the gates. The cemetery was almost empty. A groundskeeper loaded tools into a pickup truck before driving away. An elderly woman placed flowers on a grave near the entrance before leaving. Within minutes, only David and Mitchell remained, or so they thought. Hidden nearly 100 yards away, a pair of eyes watched them through binoculars. A man wearing a dark baseball cap slowly lowered them. He spoke quietly into a phone. "They're here." A voice answered. "What about Lawson?" "Already waiting." "Don't let him talk." The line went dead. The man slipped the phone into his pocket, then began walking. David spotted Lawson first. "There." Mitchell followed his gaze. The older man stood as they approached. His face looked older than it had just 2 days earlier. His shoulders sagged under the weight of 16 years of guilt. David stopped only a few feet away. "You said you were there." Lawson nodded. "I was." "You said you knew what happened."
Ido.
David's voice hardened. "Then start talking." Lawson looked at Detective Mitchell. "I wasn't expecting company." Mitchell folded her arms. "I'm not leaving." Lawson sighed. "I suppose it doesn't matter anymore." He looked back at David. "For 16 years. I've lived with something I can never undo." David's patience disappeared. "What happened?" Lawson swallowed. "The blackout was worse than anyone admitted." "I know about the blackout."
No.
Lawson shook his head. "You don't. There wasn't just one emergency. There were 3. David frowned. "What do you mean?" "There were 6 babies born that night." "You know that." David nodded. "But there was another emergency. A woman in room 7. What happened?" "She suffered massive complications. The baby stopped breathing." David felt his chest tighten. "Did the baby survive?" Lawson closed his eyes.
No.
Silence. Mitchell quietly took notes. Lawson continued. "The parents. They were wealthy. Very wealthy. They had already lost 2 pregnancies. This child was everything." David listened without blinking. When the doctor pronounced the baby dead, the father completely lost control. He started screaming. He threatened lawsuits. He threatened the hospital. He threatened everyone. Lawson looked away. "I've never seen grief like that." David asked quietly, "What happened next?" Lawson hesitated, then whispered, "Someone made a suggestion." David's heartbeat quickened. "What suggestion?" Lawson looked sick. "They said, no one has to know." David stared at him. "What?" "The administrator." He believed the blackout created an opportunity. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Opportunity for what?" Lawson's voice cracked. "To replace the baby." The words hung in the cold air. David took a step backward.
No.
Lawson nodded slowly. "They wanted to take another newborn and tell the grieving parents it was theirs." David's face drained of color. "You're lying." "I wish I was." Mitchell asked. "Who suggested it?" Lawson lowered his head. "Our hospital administrator." "What was his name?" Lawson answered quietly. "Charles Whitmore." Mitchell immediately wrote it down. "I've been looking for him." Lawson laughed bitterly. "You won't find him." "Why?" "He died 11 years ago." David interrupted. "Did they actually do it?" Lawson looked directly at him. "I tried to stop them." "What happened?" "They reminded me I had 3 children. They reminded me I couldn't afford to lose my job. They reminded me." He began crying. "That good people sometimes do terrible things when they're afraid." David clenched his fists. "So they switched the babies?" Lawson shook his head.
No.
"Not exactly." David frowned. "What does that mean?" "They tried. But everything went wrong." Before Lawson could continue, a sharp crack echoed through the cemetery. Mitchell's eyes widened. "Get down." Lawson stumbled backward. David instinctively grabbed him. Another loud crack exploded. A nearby headstone shattered. Birds burst from the trees. Mitchell drew her weapon. Behind the monument. David pulled Lawson behind a large granite memorial. "What was that?" Mitchell looked toward the tree line. "A rifle." David's pulse raced. "Someone's shooting at us?" She nodded. "They don't want him talking." Another shot echoed. Stone fragments sprayed into the air. Lawson covered his head. "Oh God! Oh God!" David looked at him. "Who are they?" Lawson was trembling uncontrollably. "I don't know anymore. I swear. I don't know." Mitchell spoke into her radio. "Officer down protocol. Shots fired. St. Anne's Cemetery. We need immediate backup." Static answered. Then silence. Her radio wasn't working. "They're jamming the signal." David stared at her. "Can they do that?" She nodded grimly. "If they planned this." "Yes." The 3 of them remained behind the monument. The cemetery fell strangely quiet. No more gunshots.
No footsteps.
Nothing. David slowly looked around the edge of the stone. "I don't see anybody." Mitchell grabbed his shoulder. "Don't." Too late. A figure suddenly emerged between the graves. Wearing black clothing. Face hidden beneath a hood. The stranger wasn't holding a rifle anymore. He was walking calmly toward them. Lawson saw him. The blood drained from his face.
No.
He whispered. "It can't be." David looked at him. "You know him?" Lawson nodded slowly. "I thought he was dead." The hooded figure stopped about 30 feet away. Then, he removed the hood. David frowned. He had never seen the man before. Mitchell hadn't either. But Lawson looked like he had just seen a ghost. His lips trembled. "You?" The man smiled. "It has been a long time, Richard." His voice was calm, almost friendly. David stepped in front of Lawson. "Who are you?" The stranger ignored him. His eyes never left Lawson. "I told you 16 years ago. If you ever spoke, you'd regret it." Lawson could barely breathe. "I kept the secret. I did everything you asked." The stranger smiled again. "Not everything." He slowly reached into his coat. David instinctively moved forward. Mitchell raised her weapon. "Don't move." The stranger stopped, then laughed softly. "You still think this is about one family?" He looked directly at David. "Mr. Carter, you've been asking the wrong question." David's heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" The stranger tilted his head. "You keep asking, Was your son switched? He smiled. You should be asking. How many children were? David felt the world stop. 6 babies. 6 families. The blackout. The missing records. The dead nurse. The threats. None of it had been about Marcus alone. The stranger's final words sent a chill through everyone. You've only uncovered the first layer. And once you learn what really happened that night, you'll wish your DNA test had never existed. The stranger smiled as if he had just shared an amusing secret. No fear. No panique. Only absolute confidence. Detective Mitchell kept her weapon trained on him. Don't move. The man slowly raised both hands. I don't have a weapon. David looked around. What did you do with the rifle? The stranger chuckled. You assume I fired those shots. You didn't. I didn't say that. Mitchell stepped forward. Who are you? The man ignored her. Instead, he looked directly at Richard Lawson. I warned you. Lawson's knees buckled.
I'm sorry.
I know. I kept quiet. I know. I never told anyone. I know. The stranger smiled again. But now, you've become a liability. David had heard enough. He stepped in front of Lawson. You're not touching him. The stranger finally looked at David. There was something unsettling about his eyes. They were completely calm, like a man who had already won. You love your son very much. David's fists clenched. Don't say his name. I wasn't going to. The stranger tilted his head. But yes, you love Marcus. David took another step. What do you know about my son? I know enough. Mitchell interrupted. You're under arrest. The man laughed. For what? Attempted murder. I haven't fired a shot. You threatened witnesses. I made a conversation. Mitchell's jaw tightened. You tampered with evidence. So you believe. The stranger slowly reached into his inside pocket. Mitchell shouted, Don't. He froze. Then, using 2 fingers, he carefully removed a business card. He placed it on a nearby headstone. I'm leaving. David looked confused. That's it. For today. The man smiled one last time. You'll be seeing me again. Then he turned, walked calmly between the rows of graves, and disappeared into the trees. Mitchell started after him. David grabbed her arm. Wait. We can't let him go. She shook her head. It's too late. Why? He wants us to follow him. David looked toward the woods. The silence was unnatural.
No birds.
No wind. Nothing. Mitchell slowly lowered her weapon. It's a trap. The first police sirens arrived almost 10 minutes later. Officers spread across the cemetery. Search dogs were brought in. Drones circled overhead. Nothing. The stranger had vanished. As if he had never been there. A young officer approached Mitchell. We found the shell casings. Good. They're 20 years old. She frowned. What? The rounds fired today were manufactured more than 20 years ago. David looked confused. Does that matter? Mitchell nodded. It means whoever planned this prepared for it a long time ago. Richard Lawson sat on the stone bench with his head buried in his hands. He looked broken. An ambulance crew checked his blood pressure. One of the paramedics looked at David. He's in shock. David nodded. I need to talk to him. Not yet. Please. The paramedic hesitated. 5 minutes. No more. David slowly sat beside Lawson. Neither man spoke. Finally, David broke the silence. Who was he? Lawson stared at the ground. I don't know his real name. What do you mean? We always called him the consultant. David frowned. The consultant? Lawson nodded. He didn't work for the hospital. So why was he there? Because the hospital called him. David blinked. Called him? Whenever something happened. Something that could become. He swallowed. A legal disaster. They called him. David felt sick. What exactly did he do? Lawson answered quietly. He made problems disappear. That night, the Carter house was unusually quiet. Marcus sat on the living room couch playing video games with Lily. Grandma Helen had already gone to bed. Sarah stood at the kitchen sink staring through the window. David finally walked inside. She didn't turn around. What happened today? David froze. What do you mean? I know you weren't at work. He remained silent. I know you weren't running errands. Still nothing. She slowly turned. So, where were you? David looked exhausted. I can't tell you. Sarah laughed softly. Of course. He stepped toward her. I'm trying to fix something. She nodded. I know. But whatever you're fixing, it's breaking us. Marcus suddenly appeared in the doorway. You guys okay? Both parents instantly smiled. We're fine. Marcus frowned.
No.
You've been saying that all week. Silence. Marcus looked at his father. Dad, did I do something? David immediately crossed the room.
No.
You didn't do anything. Then why are you always sad? David felt his throat tighten. He pulled Marcus into a hug. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Marcus smiled. That's a weird answer. David laughed quietly. I know. Marcus hugged him tighter. I love you. David closed his eyes. I love you too. More than you'll ever know. Later that night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She quietly climbed out of bed. As she walked downstairs for a glass of water, she noticed light coming from David's office. The door was slightly open. She almost knocked. Instead, she heard David speaking. I don't know what to do. Sarah frowned. Who was he talking to? She stepped closer. David's voice cracked. How do I tell her? Silence. Then, I can't destroy my family. Sarah slowly pushed the door open. David immediately looked up. His face turned pale. He quickly ended the phone call. Sarah. She looked around. Who were you talking to? No one. She stared at the phone still in his hand. No one. He sighed.
I'm sorry.
Her shoulders dropped. Stop. What? Stop saying you're sorry. I don't recognize you anymore. David felt tears forming. I never wanted this. Neither did I. She looked directly into his eyes. One last time. I'm asking you. Please. Tell me the truth. David reached into his jacket. His hands trembled. This was it. No more lies. No more secrets. He slowly removed the folded DNA report. Sarah frowned. What's that? David couldn't speak. He simply handed it to her. She unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the first page. Then the second. Then, the final conclusion. Her breathing stopped. She looked at David. Then back at the report. Then at David again. What? Her voice barely existed. Is this? David finally spoke. It's why everything changed. Sarah looked down once more. She read the sentence again. Probability of biological paternity. 0%. The report slipped from her fingers onto the floor. She stared at David in complete disbelief.
No.
She whispered.
No.
She shook her head violently.
No.
David's own tears began falling. The hospital confirmed it. I confirmed it again. Sarah backed away from him. You think? Her voice broke. You think I cheated on you? David couldn't answer, because until a few days ago, he had. Sarah covered her mouth. You believed that? I didn't know what to believe. Her tears finally burst free. 17 years. 17 years together. And instead of asking me, you investigated me. David stepped toward her. I know. I was wrong. She backed away again. You let me beg you. You let me think I had failed you. I know. You looked at Marcus. She couldn't finish the sentence. You looked at our son. As if. David interrupted immediately. No. I never stopped loving him. She shook her head. But you doubted him. I doubted everything. Sarah suddenly became very still. She looked at the report again, then slowly raised her eyes. I never cheated on you. David nodded. I believe you. You believe me now? Yes. Why? David took a deep breath. Because I don't think this report proves you were unfaithful. She frowned through her tears. Then what does it prove? David looked directly at her. I think something happened the night Marcus was born. Sarah stared at him. What are you saying? I think our baby may never have come home with us. The room fell completely silent. Sarah looked at him as though he had lost his mind. Then she laughed. Not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. Our baby. She shook her head.
No. No.
That's insane. David quietly picked up another folder. Inside were copies of the missing records, the newspaper article, the maintenance report, and Margaret Ellis's photograph. He placed them one by one on the desk. Sarah's smile slowly disappeared. By the time she reached the last page, her hands were shaking. She looked up at David, unable to speak, because for the first time, she realized he hadn't been investigating her. He had been investigating the day their son was born. David and Sarah stood in complete silence. The DNA report lay on the desk. Beside it sat the newspaper clipping about Margaret Ellis, the maintenance report documenting the 43-minute blackout, the visitor log with the unidentified initials, and the handwritten notes Detective Mitchell had copied from the surviving records. Sarah slowly sank into the chair. She picked up the DNA report one last time, then carefully folded it. Not because she accepted it, because she couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Finally, she whispered, "You really believed I could do something like that?" David's eyes filled with tears. For 2 days. Yes. He lowered his head. And those were the longest 2 days of my life. Sarah nodded slowly. I should hate you. I know. I should be furious. I know. I should walk away. I know. She looked at him for a long moment. But I know the man I married. David looked up. The man I married would never accuse me without a reason. She gestured toward the papers. If I had seen these, I probably would have been asking the same questions. David broke down. I'm so sorry. Sarah walked over and wrapped her arms around him. I forgive you. He buried his face against her shoulder. I don't deserve that.
No.
She smiled sadly. But forgiveness isn't earned. It's given. For the first time since the nightmare began, they cried together instead of apart. The following morning, they told Detective Mitchell everything. She spread the documents across the conference table. Now we're finally working with the whole family. Sarah looked at the detective. You really believe our son could have been switched? Mitchell answered carefully. I believe it's one possibility. We still don't have definitive proof. David nodded. So how do we prove it? Mitchell pulled out the maintenance report. There were 6 babies born during the blackout. She wrote 6 family names on a whiteboard. The Carter family, the Reynolds family, the Brooks family, the Alvarez family, the Whitaker family, and, she paused, the Holloway family. Sarah frowned. Who were they? Mitchell took a slow breath. The family whose baby was officially declared stillborn. Silence filled the room. David stared at the final name. Holloway. Mitchell nodded. If a switch happened, it almost certainly involved them. Sarah asked quietly, Are they still alive? Mitchell looked uncomfortable. The mother passed away 5 years ago. What about the father? He's alive. And, she hesitated. He has spent 16 years believing his child died. 3 days later, David and Sarah drove together to a small coastal town nearly 4 hours away. Detective Mitchell had arranged the meeting. Neither of them spoke much during the drive. Every possible outcome terrified them. If Marcus wasn't their biological son, then somewhere, their biological child might still be alive, living another life, calling someone else, Mom, Dad. An elderly man opened the front door. His hair was completely gray, his shoulders stooped with age. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with years. You must be David. David nodded. And Sarah. The man stepped aside. Please, come in. His home was modest. On the fireplace sat a framed photograph of a young woman. David pointed toward it. Your wife. The man smiled softly. Emily. The best person I've ever known. Sarah noticed fresh flowers beneath the picture. You still bring her flowers. Every Sunday. He sat down slowly. I've had a lot of time to think. Mitchell had already explained why they were coming. The old man looked directly at David. When the detective first contacted me, I thought she was cruel. I buried a child. I buried my wife. I buried that chapter of my life. He looked down at his hands. Then she showed me the maintenance report. The blackout. The missing records. The nurse. And suddenly, I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. David spoke gently. We're not here to take anything from you. The man nodded. I know. I just want the truth. So do we. Several weeks later, with court approval, investigators located surviving biological samples from the Holloway family's hospital records. Modern forensic testing began. The wait felt endless. Marcus had recovered enough to return to school. Life looked normal from the outside. Inside the Carter home, nothing felt normal. One evening, Marcus found David sitting alone in the unfinished treehouse. You hiding? David smiled. Maybe. Marcus climbed beside him. You've been weird lately. I know. You gonna tell me why? David looked at the teenager beside him. The boy who loved basketball, who hated vegetables, who laughed too loudly, who had called him Dad since the day he learned to speak. DNA suddenly felt very small compared to 16 years of memories. David put an arm around his shoulders. Can I ask you something? Marcus nodded. What makes someone a father? Marcus shrugged. I don't know. David smiled. Think about it. Marcus thought for a moment, then answered. The guy who shows up. David's throat tightened. Marcus continued. The guy who teaches you to ride a bike. The guy who embarrasses you at school. The guy who fixes stuff. The guy who always answers the phone. He laughed. And the guy who burns pancakes every Saturday. David chuckled through tears. So, if science said he wasn't your biological father, Marcus looked confused. I'd say science missed a few things. David stared at him. Marcus shrugged again. You've always been my dad. I don't really care what a piece of paper says. David hugged him tightly, longer than ever before. Marcus laughed. Dad, I can't breathe. David smiled.
Sorry.
No, you're not.
No.
I'm really not. 2 weeks later, Detective Mitchell called. We have the results. David and Sarah immediately drove to her office. Neither spoke during the entire journey. Mitchell waited until they were seated. Then she placed one final report on the table. This confirms. She paused. Marcus is not biologically related to either of you. Sarah closed her eyes. David reached for her hand. Mitchell continued. We also compared the preserved samples from the Holloway family. Silence. The match was conclusive. David's heartbeat echoed in his ears. What does that mean? Mitchell looked directly at them. It means Marcus is the biological son of Emily and Thomas Holloway. Sarah began crying. David simply stared, unable to move, unable to breathe. Mitchell took another breath. We also located your biological son. Neither of them spoke. The detective smiled gently. He's alive. David's eyes filled instantly. Alive? Yes. Where? Mitchell slid a photograph across the table. A young man, 16 years old. Bright smile. Dark hair. Kind eyes. Sarah covered her mouth. She couldn't finish. He looked so familiar. Not because they knew him, because he looked exactly like David had at 16. Mitchell smiled softly. His name is... She paused. Daniel Whitmore. David frowned. Whitmore? Mitchell nodded. The adoptive family who raised him. She hesitated. Was the family of Charles Whitmore. David froze. The hospital administrator? Yes. The room fell silent. The very man Lawson had accused of orchestrating the cover-up. had raised David and Sarah's biological son as his own. Months later, David stood outside the courthouse long before sunrise. The building was still closed. Rainwater glistened across the stone steps, and reporters were already setting up cameras behind the barricades. 16 years earlier, no one had believed a frightened nurse who insisted something terrible had happened inside St. Mary's Hospital. Today, everyone wanted to hear the truth. Sarah joined him, slipping her hand into his. "You don't have to go through this alone." He looked at her and smiled. A real smile, the first she had seen in weeks. "I'm not alone anymore." She rested her head against his shoulder. "No," she whispered. "You're not." Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. Former nurses, doctors, hospital employees, families whose names had appeared in the maternity records, journalists, and in the front row sat Thomas Holloway. He looked smaller than David remembered. Grief had aged him beyond his years. His hands remained folded tightly in his lap as though he were afraid they might shake apart. When Richard Lawson entered the witness box, the room became silent. He looked toward the gallery, then toward Margaret Ellis's framed photograph, placed quietly beside the prosecution team as a tribute to the nurse who had never lived to testify. Lawson lowered his head. "I should have spoken 16 years ago." His voice echoed through the courtroom. "I told myself I was protecting my family. I told myself there was nothing I could change. I told myself silence was safer than truth." He looked toward Thomas. "I was wrong." Then he looked at David and Sarah. "And because I stayed silent, 2 families paid the price." The prosecutor stepped forward. "Mr. Lawson, tell the court what happened during the blackout." Lawson closed his eyes. The identification system failed. The nursery was overwhelmed. The staff panicked. He paused. When one infant died, hospital administrators feared the consequences. What consequences? Lawsuits, public outrage, the hospital's reputation. And what decision was made? Lawson struggled to answer. Finally, he whispered, "They decided that protecting the hospital was more important than protecting the truth." Gasps spread through the courtroom. They instructed staff to alter records. They ordered bracelet numbers rewritten. They destroyed nursing notes. They threatened anyone who objected. The prosecutor held up Margaret Ellis's handwritten journal. "Did this nurse oppose those actions?" Lawson nodded. "Every single one." "Did she attempt to report them?" "Yes." "Did she die before she could testify?" "Yes." His voice cracked completely. "I have lived with that guilt every day." Weeks later, the final laboratory reports were complete. There was no remaining doubt. Marcus was Thomas and Emily Holloway's biological son. Daniel was David and Sarah's biological son. No one celebrated. There was too much grief mixed with relief. Too many birthdays missed. Too many first words unheard. Too many memories that could never be reclaimed. The first meeting was arranged quietly. No reporters. No cameras. No lawyers. Just 2 families inside a community center overlooking a small lake. Daniel arrived first. He was taller than David expected, nervous enough to keep rubbing his palms against his jeans. He had David's eyes. Sarah noticed them immediately. She had seen those same eyes every morning across the breakfast table for 17 years. Her legs nearly gave way. Daniel spoke first. I don't really know what to call you." Sarah smiled through tears. "You don't have to call us anything. We're just grateful you came." Daniel nodded. "So am I." A moment later, another door opened. Marcus walked in beside Thomas Holloway. Neither teenager spoke. Neither knew how. Finally, Marcus took a slow breath. "This feels impossible." Daniel laughed nervously. "I was thinking exactly the same thing." Silence settled again. Then Marcus stepped closer. "I don't know what this makes us." Daniel smiled. "I think brothers." Marcus looked at him for a long second. Then he smiled too. "I've always wondered what having a brother would be like." Without another word, Daniel wrapped him in a hug. The adults watched in silence. There were no dramatic speeches, only tears. Sometimes tears say everything words cannot. Months passed. Healing came slowly. There was no magical return to normal. There couldn't be. The past could never be rewritten. But the future could. One Saturday afternoon, David stood beneath the old oak tree in the backyard. The unfinished treehouse still waited exactly where he and Marcus had left it. Daniel walked over carrying a toolbox. "I heard this project has been delayed." David smiled. "A little." Marcus appeared behind him carrying wooden planks. "We figured we needed another set of hands." For hours, the three of them worked together. They measured crooked boards, dropped screws, argued over instructions, laughed when the roof had to be rebuilt because someone, Marcus insisted it wasn't him, had measured the wrong side. As the sun began to set, the treehouse finally stood complete. Marcus climbed inside first. Daniel followed. David remained on the ladder for a moment, looking at both boys. One had his smile. The other carried 16 years of memories. He realized something that no DNA test could ever measure. His heart had never divided. It had simply grown. Marcus looked down. "Dad." David smiled. "Yeah. You coming up?" Daniel laughed. "Yeah. Dad." David climbed the ladder. When he reached the top, the three of them sat together watching the sunset spread across the neighborhood. No one spoke. No one needed to. Below them, Sarah and Thomas stood side by side. Thomas quietly said, "I missed 16 years." Sarah looked at him gently. "You didn't choose that."
No.
"But I can choose what I do with tomorrow." She nodded. "And tomorrow starts now." Later that evening, Richard Lawson stood alone beside Margaret Ellis's grave. He placed a single white lily on the headstone. "I'm sorry it took me so long." The wind rustled the nearby trees. "I was afraid. I thought silence would protect everyone." He looked down. It only protected the guilty. For the first time in 16 years, he walked away feeling that the burden he had carried was finally beginning to lift. Years later, visitors to the Carter home often noticed two framed photographs hanging side by side. One showed Marcus graduating. The other showed Daniel. When people asked how many children David and Sarah had, David never hesitated. 2 sons.
No explanación. No hesitación.
Just pride. Because the DNA test had uncovered the truth. But it had not destroyed the family. It had revealed that love was always stronger than the lie that tried to separate them. And in the end, that became the family's greatest legacy. The years that followed were not perfect. People often imagine that once the truth is revealed, life immediately becomes simple again. It doesn't. Truth closes one chapter. Then it asks everyone to begin another. There were difficult conversations. Birthdays that felt bittersweet. Family photographs where everyone quietly wondered where they should stand. There were moments when Marcus wanted time alone with David. Moments when Daniel wanted to ask Sarah questions only a mother could answer. And there were days when Thomas struggled with the overwhelming realization that his son had grown up only 20 miles away, close enough to meet by chance, yet separated by a single decision made in a hospital hallway. No one pretended those feelings didn't exist. Instead, they talked, sometimes through tears, sometimes through laughter, but they talked, because silence had stolen 16 years from them. None of them were willing to let it steal another day. One autumn afternoon, David was repairing the fence in the backyard when Marcus walked over carrying 2 cups of lemonade. He handed one to his father. "You've been thinking." David smiled. "Is it that obvious? You always tighten the same bolt 3 times when you're thinking." David laughed. "I do, don't I?" Marcus leaned against the fence. "I've been thinking too." "About what?" Marcus looked across the yard, where Daniel was helping Lily hang decorations for Grandma Helen's birthday. "I used to wonder why this happened to us. And now," Marcus shrugged. "I don't anymore." David looked at him. Marcus smiled. "I can't change where I came from, but I get to choose where I'm going." He looked back toward Daniel. "And I get to choose who goes there with me." David placed a hand on his shoulder. "I've learned something through all this." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Being your father was never something the hospital gave me. It was something we built. Marcus grinned. Good. Because you're still helping me move into my college dorm. David laughed. I don't remember agreeing to that. You don't have a choice. Apparently not. A few weeks later, Daniel visited Thomas's home alone. Thomas nervously opened the door. I wasn't expecting you today. I know. Daniel held up a small cardboard box. I found something. Together they sat at the kitchen table. Inside the box were photographs, school certificates, old drawings, and childhood keepsakes from the Whitmore family. Daniel picked up a faded picture of himself at 5 years old. I used to think these memories belonged to one family. Thomas listened quietly. Daniel smiled. They still do. He looked directly at Thomas. But now they belong to two. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to replace anyone. Daniel reached across the table. You couldn't. I already had a father. Thomas nodded sadly. Daniel squeezed his hand. But maybe. He smiled gently. I can have another one. Thomas couldn't hold back his tears. After 16 years of believing he had buried his only child, someone had just given him permission to be a father again. That Christmas, the Carter house was louder than it had ever been. Grandma Helen insisted on cooking enough food for twice the number of guests. Lily complained that no one appreciated her carefully wrapped presents. Marcus and Daniel argued over who had secretly eaten the last slice of pie. It wasn't me. It was definitely you. You have no proof. I have eyewitnesses. Grandma Helen pointed a wooden spoon toward both boys. If you two keep arguing, I'm making both of you wash the dishes. They looked at each other, then burst into laughter. Sarah stood quietly in the doorway, watching. David wrapped an arm around her shoulders. What are you smiling about? She looked around the room. Marcus was helping Thomas untangle Christmas lights. Daniel was showing Lily how to assemble a model airplane. Grandma Helen was pretending to scold everyone while secretly smiling. Sarah whispered, "This." David nodded. "This." For years she had believed her family had been broken. Now she realized something extraordinary. It hadn't broken. It had expanded. As the evening drew to a close, everyone gathered outside. Snow began falling gently. Marcus looked toward the finished treehouse. You know, we never named it. Daniel laughed. It needs a name. Lily immediately volunteered. I have ideas. Marcus groaned. Oh no. Grandma Helen smiled. Let's hear them. Lily thought for a moment, then pointed toward the tree. How about
Second chance.
The yard became quiet. David looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at both boys. Finally, David smiled. I think that's perfect. Marcus looked up at the treehouse.
Second chance.
Daniel repeated it softly. I like that. Together, the two brothers climbed the ladder and hung a small wooden sign over the entrance.
Second chance.
The family stood below, looking up. No one noticed David quietly wipe away a tear. Not one born from grief, but from gratitude. Years later, visitors who heard the Carter family's story often asked David the same question. If you had known the truth from the beginning, would you have done anything differently? David would smile, then look toward Marcus and Daniel, usually teasing each other about something trivial. Finally, he would answer, I would have wanted the truth sooner. He paused. But I would never trade the years I spent raising Marcus. Not for anything. Love doesn't disappear because a report says your DNA doesn't match. It grows every time you show up. Every bedtime story. Every scraped knee. Every hard conversation. Every promise you keep. That's what makes a parent. And that's what makes a family. The DNA test had exposed a terrible lie. It had changed names. It had rewritten birth records. It had sent guilty people to prison. But it had failed to destroy the Carter family. Because the strongest bonds in life are not always written in our genes. Sometimes, they're written in every sacrifice we make for the people we choose to love. A DNA test revealed that David and Marcus did not share the same blood. But after 16 years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, broken bicycles, basketball games, whispered prayers, hospital nights, and unconditional love, the court could change birth certificates. Science could rewrite biology. History could finally reveal the truth. But none of them could change who Marcus still called Dad. Because blood may begin a family, but love is what keeps one together. If this story moved you, remember this: family is built by love, sacrifice, and showing up every single day, not DNA alone. If you enjoyed this journey, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes kindness, truth, and forgiveness still matter. And tell us in the comments, if you were in David's place, would DNA change who you call your child? Until next time, thank you for watching.